My husband called me overdramatic when my dad was in an accident, and then took the trip alone anyway. You guys, can you imagine being called dramatic for grieving your father's near-fatal accident and then watching your husband pack his bags for a luxury vacation, leaving you to pick up the pieces alone? That moment didn't just break my heart. It shattered the entire foundation of my life, revealing a truth so cold, it still sends shivers down my spine. It started like any other Tuesday. I was trapped in this soul-crushing open office, pretending to care about a spreadsheet that just wouldn't cooperate, when my phone started buzzing in my bag like an angry wasp. One call, another, then a frantic text from my neighbor confirming the hospital. That familiar, dread-filled drop hit me in the pit of my stomach. You know that feeling, right? When people call instead of text, it's never good news. Nobody calls to ask what you want for dinner. By the time I actually looked at the screen, saw the words about my dad getting hit by a car and being rushed to the hospital, my hands were already shaking so hard I could barely unlock it. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back, slamming into the poor woman behind me. I mumbled something incoherent to my manager about an emergency, grabbed my bag, and half ran, half stumbled out of that building. It's strange how your body just goes on autopilot while your brain is stuck on a loop. My dad got hit. My dad fell. My dad is in the hospital. I kept repeating it like a mantra, terrified that if I stopped, he'd just disappear. At the hospital, the doctor, in that strangely detached medical tone, told me it could have been much worse. I guess that was supposed to make me feel better. My dad had a fractured ankle, both wrists badly sprained from trying to break his fall, some bruised ribs, a laundry list of things that sounded minor when rattled off quickly, but looked absolutely agonizing when I saw him try to move. No head trauma, no internal bleeding, just mobility issues. I remember nodding, pretending that phrase meant something normal. But then I watched him struggle, failing to even sit up, and the reality hit me like a brick. Mobility issues meant he couldn't stand without help. He couldn't cook, couldn't shower, could barely even scratch his own nose. My dad, God bless him, is one of those stubborn older men who would rather crawl across a parking lot than admit he needs a hand. So, naturally, he tried to crack jokes. "Car probably looks worse than I do," he rasped, a forced grin on his face. "This is what I get for still walking to the grocery store like a teenager." He insisted he'd be perfectly fine alone once they sent him home, as long as he had his remote and his favorite snacks. Meanwhile, he couldn't even hold a plastic cup of water without his hands trembling. By the time they started talking discharge, I knew there was no way he was going back to that empty house without support. My mom had been gone for years, and he'd been living alone, surviving on sheer stubbornness, canned soup, and whatever meals I managed to sneak into his fridge without him accusing me of treating him like a child. I got straight to work, found a home nurse service, and set everything up before he even signed the papers. I knew if I asked first, he'd refuse on principle. All of this, by the way, happened the same week my husband and I were finally supposed to take this huge vacation. Months of planning. Sun, fancy drinks, a gorgeous hotel, the whole cliché. We'd spent evenings arguing about beach versus mountains, city versus quiet, eventually settling on this resort town, convinced it was exactly what we needed. We'd both been working nonstop, barely seeing each other, collapsing into bed exhausted every night. The running joke was we were going to remember what each other actually looked like without work clothes and eye bags. So there I was, sitting on one of those hard plastic hospital chairs, holding my phone in one hand, my dad's discharge papers in the other. The check-in date for the trip glared at me from the confirmation email. The nurse was explaining medication schedules. My dad was arguing with the hospital TV remote. And all I could hear was my own brain screaming, "There is no way I can leave him like this. No way." That night, I dragged myself home, bones aching, mind buzzing. My husband was in the kitchen, surrounded by travel printouts, planning like a military general. He had his little notepad out, the one he uses when he gets into project mode, covered in lists of places to visit, things to do. He'd even circled dishes on restaurant menus he wanted to try. It should have been cute. It used to be cute. He looked up, smiled, and for a second, I almost didn't say anything. I wanted so badly to step back into that version of my life, where the biggest problem was whether my bathing suit still fit. But then I remembered my dad's face, the flash of pain when he tried to shift in that bed. And the words just came out, without preamble. "We need to talk about the trip." He put the papers down, slowly, deliberately, like I just told him the resort had spontaneously combusted. "What about it?" he asked, his voice neutral, even though mine should have told him this was serious. I explained the accident again, even though I'd called him from the hospital earlier. I told him about the nurse, yes, but how my dad could barely move, how he lived alone, how he'd need constant checking in for at least the first few weeks. "I think we should postpone," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Or maybe cancel and rebook." I called the airline. They said we could get credits. The hotel has that flexible policy you liked, remember? We wouldn't lose everything. He stared at me for a long, cold moment, as if trying to figure out if I was serious or auditioning for a prank show. Then he let out this little laugh, completely devoid of humor. "You're being dramatic again," he said. Dramatic. That word hit me right in the gut. Again. As if this was some pattern where I was crying over spilled milk, not my 60-something-year-old dad with 2 busted wrists and a broken ankle. "I am not being dramatic," I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. "I just don't feel comfortable leaving him like this for 2 whole weeks. He can't even get himself to the bathroom." My husband shook his head, a dismissive wave. "He has a nurse." "You just said that. This is exactly what those services are for. You can't keep letting him pull you into every crisis. We've worked our asses off for this trip. I need this break. You need this break. You're overreacting." My face felt hot with indignation. Overreacting? He literally got hit by a car. "He's alive," my husband snapped, his voice tight. "He's not in the ICU. He's not dying. He has professionals around him. You call him every day anyway. You can keep calling. You can check in. Why does everything have to be on you personally, in person, every second?" That's something you need to know about my husband. When he felt cornered, he went cold. Not loud, not violent, just icy. It was like a switch. He'd go from joking and affectionate to this flat, detached tone. And suddenly, you were the crazy one for feeling anything at all. I used to think it was just how he dealt with stress. Later, I understood it was how he exerted control. I try to keep my own voice steady. It's not about everything being on me. It's about being there for my dad. He lives alone. Mom's gone. I'm literally all he has. If I was the one in that hospital bed and he booked a trip the week after, you know he'd cancel it in a second to help me. He rolled his eyes. "Your dad would love the drama. He lives for having a crisis. Besides, we already put so much money into this. Flights, hotel, time off work. We're going. I'm not throwing all that away because your dad sprained something." Sprained something? The way he said it made me want to scream. To throw something. I took a deep, shaky breath instead. It's not just a sprain. And even if it were, he can't walk. Look, I'm not saying we can never go. I'm just asking to push it a bit. We can move the dates. We might have to pay a fee, but it's not like all the money disappears. He crossed his arms, a wall. "I'm going. I have been counting down to this. I'm exhausted. I'm not letting your dad's drama ruin it." Drama. There it was again. That little word he used whenever I asked for something that wasn't convenient for him. When I wanted him to come to one of my work events. Drama. When I cried because his mom made a comment about my weight at dinner. Drama. When I got upset that he made a huge purchase without even telling me. Drama. It was his ultimate get-out-of-accountability-free card. That night, he went to bed early after dropping the classic, "I'm too tired to argue about this," which is code for conversation over. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the blank television screen, my mind racing, planning out schedules. I could increase the nurse visits. I could go to my dad's every day after work. Maybe I could survive a week away if I set everything up perfectly. I tried to twist myself into a shape that would make everyone okay, even when I knew deep down the person who wouldn't be okay was me. The next day, I brought up the trip again because apparently I enjoy torturing myself. I told him I understood he wanted the vacation, that I wanted it too, but I was still deeply uncomfortable leaving. I mentioned the airline was willing to work with us. I even brought up that time I skipped my cousin's wedding to sit in a hospital waiting room with his family when his mom had a routine surgery. He'd sworn he'd never forget that I chose them over a big family event. I hated myself for bringing it up, but I did. He stared at me like I'd pulled out a ledger. "You can't keep score like that," he said, offended. "That's manipulative." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Manipulative? I'm literally reminding you of the time I already did for your family what I'm asking you to do for mine. I'm just asking for the same level of understanding. He shook his head, already checked out of the conversation. This isn't the same thing. My mom was going in for surgery. We didn't know how it would go. It was a standard procedure, I countered. The doctor said the risks were low, and you still wanted me there, which I get. That's what partners do. He leaned back, arms folded. You need to learn to set boundaries with your dad. Every time he falls or catches a cold or has some small issue, you rush over like you're his personal nurse. He's an adult. He has insurance. He can figure it out. This trip is important for our marriage. That last line. That one really got me. Important for our marriage. Apparently, being there for my injured parent was bad for our marriage, but abandoning him to drink fruity cocktails somewhere was good for it. Got it. 3 days before the trip, he cornered me in the kitchen while I was packing a bag to take some clothes to my dad's place. "Listen," he said, his voice clipped. "I need you to promise me you're coming. I'm not doing this back and forth all the way up to the gate. I need to hear you say you're going." I froze, a pair of sweatpants clutched in my hands. I'm not promising something I'm not sure about. My dad is still barely moving around. The nurse says he keeps trying to get up alone. He keeps almost falling. I'm scared to leave him. My husband's eyes hardened. "So, which is it then? Me or your dad?" Because that's what this is turning into. Every time there's a choice, you pick him. It felt like someone had just punched all the air out of my lungs. "That's not fair," I whispered, but my voice had that thin, shaky sound I hated. "It's not me or him. You're my husband. He's my dad. I'm trying to take care of both." He shrugged, uncaring. "I'm telling you how it feels. And I'm not going to keep being the bad guy because you can't cut the umbilical cord. Either you show up at that airport, or you show me very clearly where your priorities are." That was the moment. Something cracked inside me. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I just felt this cold, heavy thing settle in my chest. I realized that no matter what I did, he was going to make me feel like I was failing someone. If I went on the trip, I would be picturing my dad struggling to get out of bed, probably alone. If I stayed, I would be the ungrateful wife who ruined the dream vacation. It was a rigged game. 2 days before the trip, he announced over dinner, in the calmest tone imaginable, "I'm going. I booked this time off. I paid for my ticket. I'm not staying here to watch you hover over your dad. You do whatever you think you need to do." He didn't ask again how my dad was doing. He didn't ask about pain levels, about physical therapy, about anything. He just talked about the good weather forecast like that was the only thing that mattered. So, I stopped arguing. There was no point screaming at a wall. I focused on my dad instead. I increased the nurse's hours. I picked up handrails, shower chairs, all the things the therapist recommended. I learned how to wrap the ankle brace correctly. I sat with my dad while he pretended he was fine and watched him almost topple over trying to reach a glass because his wrist couldn't handle the weight. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and caught him halfway out of the armchair, wobbling like a toddler. I rushed to him, grabbed his elbow, and he winced as his ribs protested. "Sit down," I snapped, more sharply than I meant to. He gave me this sheepish look. "What?" "I can't just sit here and rot. I need to get to the bathroom." "You call me or the nurse," I insisted. "You don't just launch yourself across the room like that." He sighed. "I hate feeling useless," he muttered, then softer. "I also hate feeling like I'm messing up your life. Your husband must be furious." There was a pause. I should have lied and said everything was fine, but I was just too tired. "He's not thrilled," I admitted. "He's going on the trip anyway." My dad's face fell, a weird mix of guilt and hurt. I didn't want to be a burden, he said quietly. I thought he and I had a good thing going. We always talked about sports, you know. I thought he liked me. He just doesn't like when things aren't on his schedule, I said before I could stop myself. On the morning he left, my husband wheeled his suitcase to the door without even glancing at me. No kiss, no hug, not even a pat on the shoulder. He just grabbed his passport from the bowl by the door, checked his phone, and said, "My ride is downstairs," like he was heading to a work conference. I watched him go, waiting for some last-minute pause, maybe we can figure this out. But the door shut and that was it. The silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was this thick, suffocating thing that pressed down on my chest every time I tried to breathe, every time I tried to sleep. During those first days, my routine became this exhausting, lonely loop. I woke up, dragged myself to work, trying to pretend I was present while my mind was still at my dad's house. Then I'd drive across town after my shift to check on him. I heated up meals, helped him to the bathroom, made sure his medications were lined up correctly, adjusted the pillows under his leg. By the time I got home at night, my own house felt like a stranger's place. Then one night, in the middle of all that chaos, my dad had an intense spike of pain. He called me around 2 a.m, his voice tight and panicked. I drove over in sweatpants and an old hoodie, heart pounding, convinced something terrible had happened. Turns out the pain medication schedule had gotten messed up, and he'd gone too many hours without a dose. We got it under control, called the nurse line, adjusted things. He calmed down eventually, but I sat on his couch until the sun started to come up, watching him breathe, just to make sure. Sometime around dawn, while he finally slept, I pulled out my phone. I sent my husband a long text about what had happened, about how scared my dad had been, about how I'd spent the night trying to manage everything. I ended it with, "I know you needed the break, but I really wish you were here. This is a lot." I watched the little status symbols on the app change. Delivered, then read. Then nothing. No reply that day. No reply the next. Instead, a few hours later, a picture popped up on a social media app we both used. There he was, sunglasses on, a drink in hand, standing in front of a pool that looked like it belonged in a commercial. The caption was something like, "This is the life," with a bunch of little sun emojis. Another photo. Him at some fancy restaurant, plates of food spread out like something from a magazine. People were commenting things like, "You deserve it," and "so jealous." And I just stared at my phone, wanting to throw it out the window. A friend from work called me after seeing the pictures. "Hey," she said carefully, "is everything okay with you too? I thought you were going with him." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Plans changed," I said. "My dad got hurt. I stayed." "Did he really go without you?" she asked, her voice going from concerned to pissed in half a second. "Seriously?" "Yeah," I said. "Seriously." "Girl," she whispered. "I don't want to say what I'm thinking, but you know what I'm thinking?" I knew. I also knew I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. We had this shared credit card we used mostly for household stuff and trips. I did the boring part, checking statements, paying bills. During that second week he was gone, I logged in to pay off part of the balance. And I saw it. One charge that didn't fit. It was from some kind of spa package at the resort, double the price of the usual services. The description mentioned something about a couple's package. My stomach dropped. I stared at that line so long the numbers started to blur. I told myself it could be a glitch. He could have treated another couple. He could have just booked the wrong thing and gone alone. I told myself all the stupid stories women tell themselves when they're trying not to admit that maybe the person they love is capable of being exactly the kind of person they swore they'd never be. I hated myself a little for even thinking it. My dad was literally fighting just to get to the bathroom, and I was sitting at his kitchen table obsessing over a credit card line. I closed the app, shoved the phone face down, and told myself to focus on what was right in front of me. One crisis at a time. But after about a week of this, I cracked. I was at my own kitchen table now, eating cereal for dinner, because cooking felt like an impossible math equation. My friend called again. She asked gently, "Have you actually talked to him since he left?" "No," I said, hearing how small my own voice sounded. "He hasn't called." He hasn't texted back. Nothing. She exhaled slowly. You know that's not normal, right? I shrugged, even though she couldn't see me. He says he needs space when he's stressed. That's not space, she countered. That's punishment. Look, I'm going to say something you're not going to like. You should maybe talk to a lawyer. Not because you have to do anything right now, but so you know what you can do if you want to. My first reaction was pure defensiveness. I'm not divorcing him over a trip, I said quickly. I mean, yes, he's being an ass, but this is a lot. My friend was quiet for a second. Then she said, it's not just the trip, and you know it. It's how he's been treating you for a long time. The silence thing. The way he makes everything your fault. You've been shrinking yourself for years. I'm not telling you to leave him tomorrow. I'm saying maybe stop acting like you're trapped when you might not be. I sat there, staring at the pattern on my countertop. The idea of talking to a lawyer felt extreme, like jumping off a cliff. I was raised on this whole idea that you stick it out, that marriage is hard work, that you don't throw it away, because things get rough. But then I pictured my dad's face the night he was crying from pain, and my husband's face in that pool picture. And something inside me tilted. Just to get information, my friend said, sensing my hesitation. Information isn't betrayal. That line stuck with me. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept getting up, pacing, checking my phone, even though there was nothing new. Staring at the ceiling, eventually around 3 a.m, I opened my laptop and searched for local divorce lawyers. The word looked ugly on the screen. I picked one almost at random from a list of people who probably heard stories like mine every day and filled out the little contact form. The next morning, they called me back and offered an appointment for later in the week. Walking into that office, I felt like I was cheating on my wedding vows just by being there. The lawyer was this calm woman with a soft voice and very direct eyes. She asked me to tell her what was going on. I started with the trip, and the accident, and the silence. But once I started talking, other things came spilling out. The fight we had months ago when I mentioned wanting to quit my corporate job and open a small creative business. How he froze me out for days. The way he always controlled our social life. Who we saw when we saw them. The constant use of words like dramatic, unstable, needy whenever I pushed back. She listened without interrupting much, just asking little clarification questions. Then she explained, very matter-of-fact, what my options were, how separation worked, what would happen with assets. She asked if I had anything that was mine alone, like property I had before the marriage. I told her about the little house I inherited from an aunt, the one we moved into after the wedding because it made more sense than renting. She nodded and said that an inherited house is usually considered separate property as long as you kept things clearly in your name and didn't mix everything completely. We talked about the shared credit card, our similar incomes, the fact that we didn't have kids. She didn't tell me what to do. She just laid out pathways like a map. When I left, my head was buzzing. Having options was both terrifying and weirdly comforting. That evening, at my dad's place, he tried to make scrambled eggs with one working hand and almost dropped the pan. I took over, gently shoving him back to his chair. He made some dumb joke about becoming left-handed, then stopped and peered at me. You look tired, he said. More tired than usual. I snorted. Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear. He shook his head. You know what I mean. You have that look your mom used to get when she was carrying something heavy in her mind. For some reason, that cracked something open. I told him about the lawyer. Not every detail, but enough. His eyes got big. Are you sure that's what you want? He asked. I don't want you to blow up your life because of me. This isn't because of you, I said. You just pulled the curtain back faster. If it wasn't this, it was going to be something else eventually. He sighed. And for the first time since the accident, he looked a little smaller. He hasn't called to check on me, he said quietly. Not once. I swallowed hard. I know. He reached over with his good hand and squeezed my fingers. I love you, he said. I hate that you're going through this, but I'm glad I'm not the only one seeing it. When my husband finally came back from his trip, his return was the opposite of dramatic. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was at home for once, instead of at my dad's, folding laundry on the couch when I heard the door open. He rolled his suitcase in, tan, and relaxed like he'd just come from a wellness retreat. He gave me this little nod like, "Hey, what's up?" as if he hadn't ghosted me and my injured father for 2 weeks. He dropped his keys in the bowl, glanced at the stack of mail on the table and said, "Did anything important come while I was gone?" Like he'd been out grabbing groceries. I stared at him for a second because my brain genuinely could not process that level of casualness. "You didn't answer my messages," I said. "At all," he shrugged, kicking off his shoes. I needed to unplug. That was the whole point. The service was terrible down there anyway. You know how it is. I thought about the time-stamped photos he'd been posting from the pool, from the restaurant, from the beach. "Also," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I saw the charges on our card. That couple's spa package. Don't insult my intelligence." He didn't even deny it properly. He just lifted a shoulder like it was boring. "It was a package they push on everyone," he said. "You're doing that thing again, turning everything into a story." He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. "What are we doing for dinner?" he asked over his shoulder. "I'm starving." Something inside me just snapped into place. Not like a blow-up. More like when you finally click a puzzle piece into the only spot it ever could have gone, and suddenly the whole picture makes sense. I walked to the bedroom, hands shaking, and took the envelope out from the drawer where I had been hiding it. The divorce papers felt heavier than they were. When I came back to the living room, he was flipping through the mail with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other. I set the envelope on the table in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, frowning like I had handed him a parking ticket. "Read it," I said. He opened it, skimmed the first page, and went pale. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "This is a joke, right?" "It's not a joke," I said. My voice was weirdly calm. "I went to see a lawyer while you were gone. That is the petition." He looked up at me like I had slapped him. "You're divorcing me because I went on a trip we paid for?" I laughed, and it sounded almost hysterical, even to my own ears. "No. I'm divorcing you because you literally left me to deal with my hurt dad alone, didn't contact me once, then came home and asked, 'What's for dinner?' Like I'm your maid. The trip was just the clearest example so far of how you see me." He shook his head, paper rustling in his hands. "You're being ridiculous. I've always been independent. You knew that when you married me. I'm not one of those guys who needs to be glued to his wife every second." "Independent is one thing," I said. "Abandoning your partner during a family crisis and then stonewalling them for 2 weeks is another." He scoffed. "Your dad was fine. You just like to play the hero. You wanted me on my knees thanking you for sacrificing your vacation. When I refused to feed into that, you ran to a lawyer." There it was again. My feelings framed as an over-the-top performance. Drama. I could almost hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. "I didn't run to anyone," I said slowly. "I walked. I thought about it. I talked to people. I consider my options. This is not a tantrum." He threw the papers onto the table. "So what? You're just done? That's it? You're going to throw away all these years because of this?" I took a deep breath. "This isn't just this. This is every time you used silence to punish me. Every time you made me feel crazy for having needs. Every time I shrank myself so you wouldn't call me dramatic. This trip just made it impossible for me to lie to myself anymore." We went back and forth like that for a long time. Him insisting he'd done nothing wrong. Me listing things I had kept tucked away in my chest for years. He kept circling back to the money, how much we had spent, how irresponsible it would be to just throw it away. I realized somewhere around the 3rd time he mentioned the price of the tickets that he was more upset about the financial investment of the marriage than the emotional one. Finally, after what felt like hours, I said, "You can pack a bag and go stay somewhere else. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I need space. I need you out." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're going to regret this," he said, voice low. "You're being impulsive. You're making a huge mistake because you're emotional right now." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather regret leaving than spend the rest of my life regretting staying." He grabbed a duffel from the closet and started throwing clothes into it. It was messy, hurried, nothing like his usual obsessive packing lists. He slammed drawers, stomped around, muttered under his breath. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob. "You can't say I didn't try," he said. I almost laughed again. "You didn't," I said quietly. "That's kind of the point." The door closed behind him with a thud that seemed to echo way louder than it should have. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up to my chest, and sobbed. Not cute crying either. Ugly, snotty, whole body shaking crying. I felt grief for the man I thought I married, for the version of my life I had been holding on to with white knuckles. For every time I had told myself it would get better, if I just tried harder. The next couple of days, he called. The first time was 3 days later, in the middle of my workday. I saw his name on the screen, and my stomach flipped. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, I stepped into the stairwell at work and answered. "What do you want?" I asked. "No hello. No small talk." "This is ridiculous," he said. I could hear street noise in the background. "How long am I supposed to stay in this hotel? Do you have any idea how expensive this is?" There it was. Not, "How are you?" Not, "How is your dad?" Just, "Do you know how expensive this is?" "Nobody is forcing you to stay in a hotel," I said. "You chose to leave. You could stay with a friend or find a short-term rental or figure out your own life like the independent man you keep telling me you are." He huffed. "Can we just hit reset?" I said some things. You said some things. I needed that trip, and I'm not going to apologize for that. But I miss you. I miss home. If you miss me so much, why didn't you call me once while you were gone? I asked. He stalled for a second. I told you. The reception was weird, and I didn't want to get sucked into drama while I was trying to relax. I closed my eyes. "I'm not doing this," I said. "I'm moving forward with a divorce. Talk to your lawyer." "You're really going to throw everything away over your feelings?" he snapped. "Yes," I said. "Over my feelings. Wild concept, I know." After that, the text started. First, it was the fake apology texts. "I'm sorry you felt hurt. I'm sorry if you misunderstood. I'm sorry things turned into this." Which, isn't the same as, "I'm sorry for what I did." Then came the guilt trips. "I never thought you would be this cruel. I can't believe you're doing this to me after everything I've done for us." When I didn't respond, he switched strategies again. One night, my phone lit up with a series of voice messages. His voice was all broken and shaky, like he'd been crying. He said things like, "You are my whole life, and I don't know who I am without you. And I will do better. I promise." I listened to them, sitting on my couch with a blanket around my shoulders. And my heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions. Part of me remembered the guy I married, the one who used to make stupid jokes to cheer me up, who brought me takeout when I worked late, who danced with me in our tiny kitchen at midnight. That part wanted to run to him, to believe that this was a turning point, that he finally understood. The other part remembered the look on his face when he left for that trip. The way he dismissed my dad's pain as drama. The couple's spa charge. The silence. That part won. I silenced the thread. I didn't block him yet because we still had to deal with logistics, but I stopped feeding into the roller coaster. A couple of weeks into this weird limbo, I went back to see the lawyer. She'd been waiting for his formal response. When I sat down in her office, she slid a folder across the desk. "He's not contesting the divorce itself," she said, "but he has some requests." Requests turned out to be an understatement. In his official response, he agreed that the marriage was irretrievably broken, which, sure, that's one way to put it. Then he listed financial demands that made my jaw drop. He wanted monthly support from me, even though we make basically the same amount of money. He wanted a chunk of my retirement account. Most insultingly, he wanted the house sold so that the proceeds could be split down the middle. "This house was left to you before you even met him, correct?" my lawyer asked. "Yes," I said. "My aunt left it to me in her will. My name is the only one on the deed. We did some renovations after we moved in, and we both contributed to that, but the actual property is mine. She nodded. He's arguing that because marital funds were used for improvements, he is entitled to half of the equity. It's a stretch, but not completely unheard of. Still, based on your documentation, we have a strong argument that the core value of the house remains your separate property. I stared at the numbers on the page. It wasn't just about the money. It was what it represented. He had always bragged about being independent, about never needing anyone, about how he could walk away from anything and land on his feet. Now, suddenly, he wanted me to pay him to leave and take half of the only thing that actually felt like mine. So, basically, I said slowly. He ignored me for 2 weeks, came home like nothing happened, got served, and now he wants me to fund his exit? My lawyer's mouth twitched in something like sympathy. That is one way to look at it. She pointed out another section. He also claimed that you are emotionally unstable and prone to overreaction, and that your decision to pursue divorce is a symptom of that. He framed your care for your father as enmeshment, and said you have difficulties separating your marriage from your family of origin. I barked out a laugh, even as my stomach twisted. So, he's basically pathologizing me for not abandoning my injured parent. He's framing it that way, yes, she said. Don't take it personally. These filings are often written in the most dramatic way possible to strengthen their side of the argument. He's trying to make himself look reasonable by making you look irrational. He's been doing that for years, I muttered. This is just the first time it's in writing. We started mediation a few weeks later. Sitting across from him in that bland conference room, with the mediator and our lawyers between us, felt surreal. He wore his nice button-down shirt, the one he always wore to important things, and he had that same calm face he used when he wanted me to feel dramatic for reacting. The mediator went through the list of issues: division of possessions, bank accounts, the shared credit card debt, the question of the house. To my surprise, he agreed pretty quickly on most of the smaller things. We split the furniture, the smaller assets, the debt. He didn't fight me on the car. He conceded on the support payments once my lawyer pointed out how similar our incomes were. It was like he was trying to speed-run the process as long as he could keep his eye on that one big prize. The only thing he refused to budge on was the house. We both lived there, he said. We both put money into it. I'm entitled to half. That house was gifted to her by family, my lawyer said calmly. She could have kept it as an investment and never moved in with you. Instead, she offered you both a lower cost of living and stability. That does not magically make it marital property. He rolled his eyes. Wow, so generous. Do I need to send a thank you card to her dead aunt? The mediator cleared their throat and reminded us all to keep things civil. My hands were shaking under the table, but my voice somehow stayed steady. You are not getting my aunt's house, I said. You can take pretty much anything else we have collected together, but that stays with me. I grew up visiting that place. It's the only thing I have left that feels like mine. You don't get to take that, too. He gave me a look full of contempt. You're not thinking logically, he said. You're letting your emotions run everything, as usual. Cool, I said. Then I guess my emotionally unstable self and her lawyer will see your reasonable self and his lawyer in court if we have to. During a break, my lawyer and I stepped into the hallway to breathe. She glanced at the paperwork and then at me. He's going to keep using that language, she said quietly. Dramatic, unstable, emotional. It's strategic. If he can get you to explode, he can point at you and say, see? That's what I mean. So, I'm supposed to sit there like a robot while he insults my dead aunt? I asked. You're supposed to pick your battles, she said. You're doing well so far. Let him show who he is on paper. We'll handle the rest. Outside of the legal circus, life kept moving. I still had my full-time job. I still had my dad's recovery logistics. I still had to remember to eat and sleep, and occasionally do something that didn't involve paperwork or pain meds. Somewhere in the middle of all that, the thing I had buried months before resurfaced. My stupid little dream of quitting corporate and starting something of my own. Before the accident, before the fight, I had told my husband I wanted to open a small studio space with my friend doing creative services. He had shut it down so hard that I had stuffed the idea into a mental drawer and slammed it shut. Now, weirdly, with my whole life already on fire, that drawer creaked open again. My friend brought it up one night while we were sitting on my couch eating reheated pizza. You know, she said, if there was ever a time to start over, it's when everything is already a mess. I groaned. You're going to give me a motivational speech now? She grinned. Relax. I'm not putting anything on a mug. I'm just saying you talked about this forever. You even had a name picked out, and everything. What if instead of pouring all your energy into surviving this divorce, you also poured some into building the life you actually wanted? The thought made my stomach flip. What if it fails? I asked. She shrugged. Then it fails. You'll still be you. You'll still have your skills. You'll figure it out. But what if it doesn't fail? What if it goes okay? My dad surprised me by backing her up. One evening while we were watching some boring show together at his place, he said, "You used to light up when you talked about that business idea. You don't light up much these days. Maybe you should chase that again." I don't want you thinking I'm doing anything drastic because I'm spiraling, I said. He snorted. You're allowed to do things because you want them, not just because you're running away from something. Besides, if your ex thought you were irresponsible for wanting to use your own talents to build something, maybe that says more about him than about you. So slowly, in between hospital follow-up visits and meetings with lawyers, I started sketching out plans again. My friend and I ran numbers on my laptop at my kitchen table. We made lists of services we could offer. We looked at tiny, affordable office spaces and daydreamed about what we could turn them into. Another friend, one I hadn't seen much because my ex always said she was a bad influence, offered to invest a small amount to help us start. Every step forward felt like walking with weights attached to my ankles. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calling my ideas unrealistic, childish, irresponsible. I had nights where I lay awake, convinced that if the business failed, it would prove he had been right about me all along. But the thought of going back to my old life unchanged felt even worse. Meanwhile, my dad was slowly, stubbornly healing. We slowly reduced the nurse visits until it was just check-ins, and then eventually none at all. Physical therapy started. He cursed under his breath when the exercises hurt, and then apologized to the therapist like a kid caught swearing at school. He learned how to maneuver with a cane. The first time he made it from the couch to the kitchen without my help, he raised his arms like a boxer in the ring. "Look at me," he crowed. "Still got it." We finally reached a settlement in the divorce a few months later. He pushed on the house all the way up to the edge, but the combination of legal arguments and the fact that we had all the paperwork in order worked in my favor. In the end, he backed off, probably because the idea of a drawn-out court fight bored him more than the idea of getting less than half of what he wanted. The final agreement looked fair on paper. We split what we had built together. I kept my aunt's house. No support payments either way. It was objectively a clean break. Subjectively, it felt like crawling out of a minefield with my legs still attached. The day the divorce was officially finalized, I walked out of the courthouse clutching a folder of documents that said, in a few paragraphs of legal language, that I was free. My friend met me on the steps with coffee. My dad insisted on taking us both out to dinner to celebrate, even though he still walked with a slight limp and probably shouldn't have been driving. We sat in a little family restaurant, the kind with sticky tables and loud kids. And for the first time in a long time, I could take a deep breath without feeling like it got snagged on something sharp. The business, by then, was actually a real thing. We had signed a lease on a tiny space with terrible fluorescent lighting and turned it into something cozy with lamps and rugs and a ridiculous number of secondhand plants. We had our first handful of clients. The income was nowhere near my old salary yet, so I kept one foot in my corporate job part-time while the new thing grew, but it felt like progress. A few weeks after the divorce, my ex showed up there. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My friend and I were in the middle of reorganizing some shelves when the door opened, and in he walked like he owned the place. He glanced around slowly, eyes scanning the decor, the furniture, the half-finished coffee on my desk. "So," he said, his lips twisting, "this is the big dream." My heart started pounding, but I forced my hands to stay busy. "We're in the middle of something," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "What do you want?" He smirked. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I was in the neighborhood." The neighborhood, by the way, is nowhere near where he lives now. He had to go out of his way to be in the neighborhood. He walked over to a display and picked up one of our promotional cards, turning it over like he was examining a bug. "Cute," he said. "Very small." My friend, bless her, straightened up and gave him a look that could cut glass. "Can we help you with something?" she asked. "We have actual work to do." He ignored her and kept talking to me. "I just wanted to see what you traded our marriage for," he said. "It's funny. You blew everything up over your dad and this little project, and for what? A cramped office and a dad who won't be around forever." That one hit low. I felt my face flush. "Get out," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "You know," he said, "the trip was amazing, by the way. The weather, the food, the company." He let that last word hang there, heavy and obvious. I remembered the couple's spa charge, the way his smile looked in those photos. A little different, a little more performative. "Of course you found someone to stroke your ego while you were there," I said. My voice still sounded calm, which surprised me. "You needed someone to tell you that you were the good guy." He laughed. At least she knew how to have fun. Didn't spend the whole time obsessing over her dad. There was a time when that sentence would have gutted me. When I would have obsessed over who she was, what she looked like, what she had that I didn't. In that moment, all I felt was tired. "I'm glad you had a good time," I said. "Really. I hope you and your vacation fling and your fragile ego have a beautiful life together. But you don't get to come in here and trash the thing I'm building just because you don't have access to it anymore." My friend stepped closer, crossing her arms. "You need to leave," she said to him, voice firm. "Now, or I will call building security." He looked between us like he couldn't quite believe we weren't crumbling under his words. "You're making a mistake," he said to me one last time. "You could have had it easy." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I did have it easy," I said. "That was the problem. Easy and lonely and small. I'd rather have hard and honest." He shook his head and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. The plants on the shelf next to the entrance shook slightly from the impact. For a second, I just stood there listening to the echo. My friend turned to me. "You okay?" she asked. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I think so," I said. "Weirdly, yes." People always want to know what happened after that part, too. Not just the legal stuff or the business stuff, but the messy human part. Did his family hate me? Did my friends pick sides? Did my dad ever stop blaming himself for causing all of this? Real life doesn't roll the credits just because a judge signs a piece of paper. His family did exactly what I expected. His mom called me a few days after he showed up at the office. I almost didn't pick up when I saw her name, but curiosity won. She didn't start with hello. She started with, "I heard you took him to the cleaners." I blinked. "Hi, good afternoon to you too," I said. She huffed. "You got the house and everything, and my son is in some tiny apartment. Do you feel good about that?" I leaned against my kitchen counter and stared out the window. "Your son tried to take the only thing I had left from my family and make me pay him to leave," I said. "I don't feel good about any of it. I feel like it's sad all around. But yes, I am glad I got to keep my aunt's house." "He only did that because you pushed him to the edge," she snapped. "You always were very sensitive. You know he needs space. You know he's not good with all this emotion." There it was again. Sensitive, emotional, all the coded ways to say, "You're the problem for reacting to the problem." "You know what's wild?" I said slowly. "The fact that he left the state while my dad couldn't walk, and you're calling me to ask how he is coping, not to ask if my dad is okay." There was a pause. Then she said, "Your father should take better care of himself at his age. Maybe if he didn't insist on being so independent, this wouldn't have happened." "And maybe," I said, my voice going cold in a way that surprised even me, "if your son had not been so obsessed with his own comfort, my marriage would not have ended. But here we are." She made this offended little sound. "I see you are determined to be cruel," she said. "I don't know who put these ideas in your head, but this is not the girl I welcomed into our family. I'm just the girl who finally stopped twisting herself into knots to keep your son comfortable," I said. "You don't have to like her." After that call, the rest of his family pretty much faded out. One of his cousins texted me quietly to say she understood and was there if I needed anything. But the aunts and uncles I used to spend holidays with went radio silent. It hurt. Of course it did. They had been my people for years. But honestly, the version of me they liked best was the one who smiled through disrespect and called it love. Once I stopped doing that, we didn't have much in common. My own family had their moments, too. My uncle, the one who prides himself on being practical, asked me at some gathering if I was sure I hadn't overreacted. He said, "Lots of people go on trips without their spouses. Are you really going to stay alone because of one bad decision?" I looked at him, then at my dad sitting 2 chairs away, his cane propped beside him. "It wasn't one bad decision," I said. "It was a whole pattern of decisions, and that trip just made it visible. I'd rather be alone than with someone who treats me like an accessory to his plans." My dad cleared his throat. "She is not alone," he said quietly. "She has a house, a business, friends, and a cranky old man who owes her about 100 home-cooked dinners." My uncle shut up after that. The business had its own drama. Obviously, the first few months looked cute on social media, but were terrifying behind the scenes. There were weeks when we had exactly 1 client and a stack of bills, and I would lie awake doing math in my head until it felt like my brain was overheating. There were days when my friend and I snapped at each other over tiny things because we were both stressed and scared and trying not to show it. One time, after a client backed out at the last minute and took a big payment with them, I sat on the floor in the middle of our little office and cried. Big, ugly sobs, the kind where you can't catch your breath and your chest hurts. My friend sat next to me, rested her head on my shoulder, and said, "If we fail together. We'll just tell everyone this was an elaborate performance art piece about money and burn the place down." I snorted mid-sob, which made this horrible squeaky noise, and somehow that broke the tension. We wiped our faces, ordered takeout, and spent the rest of the afternoon reworking our pricing and outreach plans. It wasn't glamorous. There was no montage. It was just 2 women being stubborn in the face of their own fear. Every so often, something would happen that almost made me miss my old life. Like the first time taxes came around, and I realized how much paperwork owning a business involved. Or when the heater in the office broke on one of the coldest days of the year, and the landlord took forever to fix it, and we had to see clients wearing 3 layers and fingerless gloves. On those days, the idea of a regular paycheck and someone else's problem pile looked very appealing. But then I would remember the sick feeling I used to get on Sunday nights when I knew I had a whole week ahead of me of keeping my head down at a job that made me feel like an interchangeable part. I would remember the way my ex used to talk about my idea like it was a cute hobby I would grow out of. I would remember sitting on the floor by our front door after he left, thinking, if I'm going to destroy my life, I at least want to be the one holding the hammer. And slowly things started to shift. A client referred us to another client. Someone left a nice review on our little website. We got an email from a stranger who had found us through a friend of a friend. The numbers in our spreadsheet started to look less like a screaming emergency and more like something that could eventually turn into stability. My dad became our unofficial marketing department. He told everyone at his physical therapy sessions about my girls at the office, like we were running a world-changing startup instead of a tiny local business. One afternoon, a woman walked in and said, "Is this where the guy from rehab sent me?" And I knew exactly who she meant. It wasn't all triumph. There were still awkward run-ins. I saw my ex once at the grocery store. I was in sweatpants, of course, and he was in work clothes that made him look put together and successful. He walked over like we were casual acquaintances and asked how the little project was going. I could tell he was fishing for news of failure. "It's keeping the lights on," I said. "And my blood pressure is lower than it has been in years. So I would call that a win." He gave me this tight smile. "If you ever get tired of the hustle, you know, there are easier ways to live," he said. I shrugged. "I tried easy," I said. "It almost killed me." He did this little laugh like I was being dramatic again, and walked away. I stood there in the canned soup aisle, surrounded by strangers, and realized my hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. I did not go home and replay the conversation 100 times, analyzing every word. I just grabbed my dad's favorite soup and moved on. On the first anniversary of the accident, my dad insisted we mark the date somehow. He said he wanted to take the power back, which is dramatic for a man who still mails in his bills. We ended up in his living room eating takeout and watching bad television, and he raised his plastic cup of soda like it was a champagne flute. "To getting hit by cars," he said. I rolled my eyes. "Great toast, Dad," I said. "Very uplifting." He shrugged. "If that car had missed me, you would probably be on some beach right now, pretending everything was fine, trying not to cry when he called you dramatic for the 3rd time that week." "Wow," I said. "You really know how to make a girl feel better about her trauma." He smiled at me, the soft, tired kind of smile that has a lot of history in it. "You know what I mean," he said. "I'm not glad I got hurt, but I am glad you saw what you needed to see. I am glad you chose you, even if I had to play the annoying old man to get you there." I looked at his cane leaning against the couch, at the faint scars on his wrists, at the wrinkles around his eyes that had deepened over the last year. "You're not annoying," I said. "Well, not all the time." He snorted. "I am absolutely annoying," he said. "But I am your annoying, and you are mine. That counts for something." We clinked plastic cups like idiots, and went back to our show. It wasn't some big cinematic moment. There was no swelling music. It was just us, in his slightly cluttered living room, breathing. When I think about that hospital chair now, I don't feel embarrassed anymore. I feel protective of that version of me. That night, after my dad's toast, I helped him stack the takeout containers, rinse the cups, and he tapped my shoulder with that cane, like he was reminding me to breathe. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around his cluttered living room, the soft hum of the TV, the quiet that didn't feel threatening for once. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." So, what do you guys think? Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone you loved was just completely out of sync with your reality? Or faced a turning point that forced you to choose yourself? I really want to know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. See you next time, B.